In 2015, the Golden State Warriors won their first NBA title since 1975, exactly 40 years prior. They were led by a trio of Klay Thompson, who had begun to establish himself as an all-time shooter, Draymond Green, who had begun to take steps towards becoming a defensive monster, and Andre Iguodala, who won Finals MVP. Oh, and also Steph Curry. Steph had just won his first of two back-to-back MVP awards in a year where he averaged 23.8 points per game, 4.3 rebounds, and 7.7 assists, while shooting 48.7% from the field and 44.3% from three. The Warriors won 67 games and ended up taking down the newly assembled Big Three Cavs in the finals. It was clear that Steph and the Dubs were on the rise and going to become a Western Conference staple. And while this season was phenomenal, it was nothing compared to what was coming next. In 2015-16, Steph Curry would become the first player in NBA history to win unanimous MVP while revolutionizing the game of basketball forever, breaking records along the way in one of the greatest seasons of all time. Let's talk about it. For those of you that are new to the channel, I'm an Oklahoma City Thunder fan, and despite the Thunder and Warriors being somewhat rivals throughout the last few years, up until the tank years of course, I've been a fan of Steph for a while now. He's such a unique player, and he really began his rise to superstardom around the time that I really fell in love with basketball. One of the most disappointing parts about KD's departure for Golden State for me, other than the very obvious one, was that Curry wasn't able to put up the insane numbers like he did prior to Durant's arrival. And over this time, I think a lot of people forgot just how great Steph was and is. In particular, I recall a big debate about whether or not Steph changed the game, whether he was generational. Now, if you ask me to rattle off the top of my head 4 or 5 players that changed the game of basketball, Steph Curry might be the first name that I say. If you compare basketball back in 2009, when Steph entered the league, to basketball now, it almost looks like an entirely different sport, in large part due to Steph's dominance beyond the arc. In 2014, the year prior to the Warriors' aforementioned title run, the Houston Rockets led the NBA in three-point attempts per game with 26.5 as a team, a pretty decent number. The year prior, they also led the league with 29.2 three-point attempts per game. Once again, not a bad number. Now, imagine we take that number and plug it into today's NBA. Where do you think they'd rank? Top 5, top 10, maybe even top 15 if we really push it? How about dead last, just behind the Chicago Bulls, the only team to shoot less than 33s a game this past season? So what happened? The answer is, of course, Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors. Going all the way back to Steph's time at Davidson in college, it was clear he was a special shooting talent. In his first year at Davidson, back in 2007, he attempted 8.8 threes per game and managed to sink 122, one of the highest marks in NCAA history. The next year, he stepped it up to 10.3 attempts a game in a season where he broke the NCAA record for threes made in a season with 162, a record that still stands today as Davidson made their deepest tournament run since 1969. The formula for success with Steph Curry became very, very clear. Let him chuck threes and you win games. During their first championship run, the Warriors that is, Steph shot a career-high 8.1 threes a game, 4.3 more than he did back in his rookie season, leading to a league-leading 646 three-point attempts. He won MVP, the Warriors won 67 games and a title, and once again it was clear that letting Steph shoot was the answer, just like it was at Davidson. So, he turned it up a notch the next year. In 2014-15, the Warriors were third in three-point shooting behind Houston and Cleveland. In 2016, they would jump to first, and Steph himself would break countless shooting records. From the beginning of the 2015-2016 season, it was pretty clear that Steph was going to take things to a completely new level. In the Dubs' first 10 games, they went 10-0, while Curry averaged 33.3 points per game, 5.6 assists, and 5.3 rebounds, while shooting 11 threes a game at a 47.3% clip, which is absolutely ridiculous. And this stretch included a 53-point game against New Orleans where he had 8 threes, a 34-point game versus Denver where he once again hit 8 threes, and a 46-point game versus the Grizzlies where, you probably guessed it, he hit 8 threes. For context, the season prior, he led the NBA in games with 8 or more threes made, with 4 of them. Through the first 10 games of this new season, he had already put up 3 of these such performances, and by game 20, he'd have 5 of them, surpassing last year's mark. By the end of the year, he'd have 16 of them. Prior to this, the record for games with 8 or more threes made in a season was held by a guy named George McLeod, who had 6 in 1996. Steph almost tripled him by breaking his record. The year prior, Steph had set the record for total threes made in a season with 286. He would overshadow this mark by his 57th game and would total 402 threes on the season when it was all said and done. Only 2 players have eclipsed even 300 threes in a season. James Harden, who hit 378 in his 2018-19 MVP season, and Steph, who has done it 4 times. This record is one that could stand for a very long time. We see a ton of guys go out there and put up a ton of threes, but none of them do it as effectively as Steph. He was doing this while being the most efficient scorer in the entire NBA. Amongst all qualified scorers in 2015-2016, Steph had the best true shooting percentage at 66.9%. For reference, the league average true shooting percentage that season amongst all players was 54.1%. Steph cleared that by 12.8% while shooting the most threes per game anyone had ever attempted up to that point. Not only that, but he was shooting them early in the shot clock, off the dribble, and from way deeper than anyone ever had before. 26.8% of all of his shot attempts were threes within the first 9 seconds of the shot clock. The Warriors really specialize in bringing the ball up the court and immediately getting into their actions to get Steph looks. If the defense was ever sleeping for more than a second in transition, or even after a made bucket, the Warriors would quickly bring the ball down the court, Steph would chuck up a 3 off a screen, or just pull up from almost half court and drill one. There was really nothing you could do most of the time. He was going to let that thing fly no matter what. When we take a look at distance, on shots from 3 to 7 feet behind the three-point line, pretty deep threes, he shot 44.6% on those type of shots. And these shots accounted for 251, over half of his 402 makes on the season. He nearly broke his own three-point record just on three-point attempts from well behind the arc. We have never seen anything like that. Even more insane is that he shot 57.7% on 26 attempts between 30 and 34 feet and 46.6% on all shots beyond 30 feet. Beyond 30 feet is ridiculous. Those are shots that are like logo level shots. And he shot 46.6% on these looks. All of these ridiculous stats to say, Steph was really good. Also, the Warriors won 73 games, in case you forgot, and while they would end up blowing a 3-1 lead in the finals, it was overall one of the greatest individual seasons of all time. Some people consider it the greatest, and I'm not going to make a claim about whether it is or not. I'll leave that up to y'all, but it is certainly in that conversation. We will probably never see a season like it again, where we see the volume and the efficiency matched together so perfectly. And the way that it revolutionized the game was seen immediately. The league immediately felt the effects of this year. In 2014-2015, only 10 players attempted 6 or more threes a game, with Steph leading the way with 8.1 attempts per game. In 2015-16, that number of players shooting 6 or more increased to 15, with Steph once again leading the way with 11.2 attempts per game, while Dame, Klay, and Harden each shot around 8. In 2016-17, that number of players attempting 6 or more jumped to 22. By 2019, that number reached 31, then 43 by 2020, and by 2022, last year, there were 44 players who shot 6 or more threes a game. That's triple the number of guys that did so back in Steph's unanimous MVP season, when he and the Warriors showcased the true value of the 3-ball. Ever since then, teams have really started to prioritize having guys shoot, and not just shoot, but guys shoot in volume. You would never have imagined this many players shooting this many threes of even just like 5-6 years ago. The league as a whole has taken 34.7 three-point attempts per game these last 2 seasons. In the 2010s, that number was just 23.1. It has been a vast and rapid growth. Three-point shooting is obviously more prevalent than ever, but not only this, percentages are improving too. 25 players shot 40% or better from 3 this past season, up from 20 in 2015-16. You might not think this would be the case with such a massive rise in volume. You'd expect some variance there, but shooters have continuously improved as they have to. In today's league, being a capable 3-point shooter is almost a necessity for players to stay in the NBA, be rotational guys, especially when you're a role player. There are some stars, guys like Ben Simmons or Rudy Gobert, who have skill sets like being a great defender or a great playmaker that can circumvent this necessity. It's not really necessary for Ben Simmons to be a great three-point shooter for him to still be effective. But it's not super common, especially amongst role players. It's very rare that you see a role player that just cannot shoot threes last in a major way in the NBA at this point. It's a really big result of this revolution that Steph kicked into high gear. But probably the biggest indicator and the most interesting one in my mind of the way that the game has changed is the playstyle of this new generation of stars. Guys like Trae Young, Luka, LaMelo Ball, Anthony Edwards, they're all prolific shooters who shoot a high volume of off-the-dribble threes from incredible distances, just as Steph has done over the course of his career. These players would not be playing the way that they are if not for Steph, as well as other influential guards like Dame or James Harden. Trae Young was asked about Steph Curry's impact this past season, and he said that Steph set the standard as a player that Trae grew up watching. He was reaching his highest level when Trae was in middle school and high school. LaMelo Ball was shooting half-court threes in high school like he was Steph, from the logo. The league has continuously evolved over its existence, but we're in the midst of an evolution that's moving at a rate like we've never seen before. Hell, if you go to your local rec center to hoop right now, and if you have, I'm sure you've noticed this, there are 10 or 12-year-old kids out there that can drill threes from 30 feet out off the dribble. It's something that young players are just starting to learn as part of their game. They've seen what Steph's done, the way the league is moving, and they're beginning to replicate that. The next generation of young stars, as we're seeing like I mentioned with guys like Trae and Luka, are going to be incredible shooters, maybe even up to the level of Steph Curry eventually. The game is almost unrecognizable, like I said earlier, from where it was even just a few years ago, and it all goes back to Steph Curry in that unanimous MVP season. You've also seen teams like the Houston Rockets and James Harden continue this evolution, and they push the idea of you either get a three or you get a layup, a mantra that many teams in the NBA kind of employ at this point. You don't see many mid-range specialists like you would have seen in the early 2000s or the 90s anymore, because that's just not the way the game is played anymore. It has continuously evolved and changed. A guy like Damian Lillard took what Steph did with his range and pushed it back even further, shooting even more logo threes than Steph would. Guys have continued what Steph put together and continue to evolve it. And as this next generation comes in, we're going to see even more and more incredible things. Who knows, maybe half-court threes will become just a normal thing by the time of 2030. Who knows, maybe they'll even have to employ a 4-point line because shooters just get too good, and it's, guys are shooting from beyond half court regularly. We don't know. But all of this change that has happened and is going to continue to come goes back to Steph in that unanimous MVP season. A year that not just revolutionized the NBA, but revolutionized the sport of basketball forever. I appreciate y'all watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. It helps me way more than you know. I also want to thank y'all for all of the support on the channel this last week or so. It's been a really incredible stretch, and I appreciate it more than you know. I appreciate you all as well. I'll see y'all later. Real one safe back.